This is the Biblical Unitarian Podcast.
Hello, and welcome to the Biblical Unitarian Podcast, the podcast that aims to start conversations about the oneness and unity of God and about the humanity of Jesus. My name is Dustin Smith, and as always, I will be your host. This is episode 346, entitled Avoiding the Ad Hominem Fallacy. Yes, after our brief detour that we had last week, we are back onto our series that is studying the logical fallacies so that we know how to identify them and, of course, how to avoid using them ourselves. So, this week, as I mentioned, we will be looking at the ad hominem fallacy. And the ad hominem fallacy occurs when somebody attacks the character or the personal traits of their opponent rather than actually engaging with the argument that they are making. So the ad hominem fallacy is a distraction from the actual issue, and it focuses on the person instead of the point that's being debated. So, what are some common ways that the ad hominem fallacy is committed in 2024? Why is this fallacy unhelpful in dialogues about God, Jesus, Christology, the development of Trinitarian thought, etc., etc.? How should we discuss theological issues without falling prey to the ad hominem fallacy? Let's find out on this week's episode of the Biblical Unitarian Podcast. Our first point today is defining the ad hominem fallacy. As we always do, we define our terms before we move forward and discuss those terms. So, as I mentioned, the ad hominem logical fallacy occurs when somebody attacks their opponent's character, their motive, or any other personal trait that that person has instead of addressing the substance of the argument that's being made. Now, ad hominem, of course, is a Latin phrase, and the ad means to, and the hominem is the accusative for person or human, so ad hominem means to a person. And this is why the phrase indicates a shift away from the argument towards the person who made that argument instead. So this type of fallacy diverts attention away from the actual issue and focuses instead on discrediting the person who is making the argument rather than the argument itself. So the ad hominem fallacy can be broken down into two different types. The first type is what I would call the abusive ad hominem. So this is where you are attacking someone's character, saying that, well, you're wrong because you are from a different denomination than my own. And the second type of ad hominem would be what I would call circumstantial ad hominem. This is where you are suggesting that someone's argument is biased or influenced or tainted by some personal circumstances. So an example would be, you can't trust this person's opinion on climate change because they work for an oil company. So one of them, of course, is attacking someone's character, and the other one is slandering them and dragging them through mud by some sort of circumstance that actually is taking place. Both forms of the ad hominem fallacy are fallacious because they don't actually address the validity of the argument that's being made. Instead, they try to undermine the opponent in ways that are pretty much irrelevant to the topic at hand. So, what are some of the ad hominem fallacies that are common in our culture today? So, of course, we're in the season of election, so there are dozens and dozens of political ad hominem attacks going on every single day, it seems. So political candidates very often will attack each other personally instead of addressing the policy issues. For example, in the presidential race, instead of debating policy, a candidate might say, well, you can't trust this guy because he's corrupt. And in doing so, they're not actually addressing the content of his policies. Now, this particular shift is focusing on a personal attack as opposed to giving a substantive critique of the specifics of the policy. Now, ad hominem attacks are absolutely rampant on social media and online debates. So if you're talking about theology on Facebook or on Twitter or on Instagram or Reddit, it's pretty common to see someone dismissing another person's arguments with insults like, well, this person's just an idiot, or you can't be taken seriously if you believe X. And this tactic is sidestepping the argument, and it undermines productive conversation. Now, celebrities, even though they're probably not the best people to be endorsing certain products or certain issues, they tend to come under ad hominem attacks fairly often. So when a particular celebrity is going to express an opinion on social issues, opponents will sometimes criticize the personal lives of that celebrity rather than the actual message that's being spoken. For example, if a celebrity makes some sort of comment on climate change, some might respond by attacking their lifestyle. Well, you fly around in a private jet, so you're a hypocrite and we shouldn't listen to what you have to say on climate change. So if all they're doing is that they're attacking this person's character and calling them a hypocrite instead of addressing the merits of the argument, then this is fallacious. It's the ad hominem fallacy. So why is the ad hominem fallacy fallacious? Well, for one, it's really irrelevant to the argument. When you are talking about someone's character, their background, or their behavior, rather than actually engaging with the argument that's being made, then you're committing this fallacy. Since the personal qualities of the individual are really unrelated to whether their argument is valid or not, we should avoid committing the ad hominem fallacy. Attacking their character doesn't really prove anything about the argument itself. Even if someone has been dishonest in their own personal life, it doesn't mean that their argument that 2 + 2 is 4 is false. Why else is the ad hominem fallacy fallacious? Well, it diverts from the issue. Instead of addressing the argument or the merits of the evidence that have been brought forward, ad hominem attacks will distract from the actual discussion. This particular tactic shifts the focus away from logic and evidence, and it prevents a meaningful examination of the issue at hand. By devoting the focus to someone's personal traits, it weakens the intellectual rigor of the debate. And it just turns into a mud-slinging fest. Why else is the ad hominem fallacy fallacious? Well, it undermines rational discourse. By attacking someone's character, you are discouraging rational and fair dialogue. Instead of fostering open discussion based on the facts and logic, you're actually fostering hostility, division, and you're provoking emotional responses. And this pretty much leads to polarizing debates that are unproductive, and in reality, nobody likes watching those. They don't have a long shelf life. And in reality, someone's personal character really doesn't determine the truth that they are saying, if they're actually telling something that is true. someone's personal failings, and guess what? We all have them. Those personal failings or their background, whether it has to do with the job that they have, mistakes that they've made, or any sort of biases that they are carrying, those don't inherently invalidate the argument that they're making. The truth or falsity of an argument depends on the logic and the evidence presented, not on the personal attributes of the individual making the claim. So, enough about that. Let's move on to our second point, point number 2, common ad hominem fallacies in christological debates. Because I know if you are a regular listener to the show, you have either been called a heretic or you've called someone else a heretic at some point in your life. Calling someone a heretic is an ad hominem fallacy. So, the first example of this fallacy being used in Christological debates would be the attack of someone's personal beliefs or their backgrounds. So, a Trinitarian may dismiss non-Trinitarian arguments by attacking their faith or their church or their particular denomination. For example, they might say, well, you're just a Unitarian, so you don't understand the Bible properly, rather than addressing the Unitarian interpretation of specific biblical text. By just pointing out that someone is of a particular theological position and claiming that because of that they don't understand the Bible properly, this is fallacious. It dismisses the argument based on an affiliation rather than engaging with the content of the argument. And in the Arian controversy, Arius was quite often attacked based on his personal beliefs and his theological stances rather than based on his arguments. So, of course, Arius argued that Christ was created, pre-existent, but not co-equal with the Father, and he was branded and labeled a heretic. And he was attacked for allegedly undermining the divinity of Christ. And his opponents, including Athanasius, attacked Arius's personal faith and his motives instead of directly addressing his scriptural arguments, dealing with the fact that Christ is not co-equal with the Father. Another common ad hominem fallacy in Christological debates is calling into question someone's credentials or their authority. And this happens quite often. So, when a Trinitarian questions the credibility or the qualifications of their opponent rather than actually their reasoning, they are committing the ad hominem fallacy. So if someone was to say, well, you don't have a PhD in theology or religion, so your views on Jesus and the divinity of Christ and the Trinity are invalid. They are shifting the focus from evaluating the argument to an attack on someone's personal credentials or lack thereof of that particular individual. And whether someone has credentials is really irrelevant as to whether their argument is logically sound. Again, someone who doesn't have academic credentials can still say that 2 + 2 is 4. Now, there also is a problem with people accusing people of blasphemy or heresy. In many cases, Trinitarians accuse non-Trinitarians of being heretics, blasphemers, or those who are committing heresies. And they do so in order to undermine their position. If someone says, well, you're a heretic for denying the Trinity, this is an ad hominem attack. It avoids engaging with the scriptural or philosophical reasons for rejecting the doctrine of the Trinity. And they use this tactic because they think that it's going to discredit the person rather than actually dealing with their theological position. So if you're someone that thinks it's okay to accuse the people that you disagree with of being heretics or blasphemers, instead of actually addressing their argument, then, unfortunately, you are guilty of committing the ad hominem fallacy. And that needs to stop on all sides of the debate. Another fallacy would be attacking someone's intelligence or their competence. So in debates, it's really not too uncommon to hear that, well, if you don't believe that Jesus is God or you don't believe in the Trinity, then clearly you don't understand theology or you don't understand the Bible or you have a faulty understanding of these topics. And this implies that people that disagree with Trinitarians lack essential intellectual capabilities. This is an ad hominem attack because it focuses on the alleged intellectual shortcomings, then providing actual reasons to support or defend the doctrine of the Trinity. And sometimes people will commit this fallacy by using the guilt of association. So there are some non-Trinitarians that are attacked because of their association with a particular church or a particular denomination. And critics will use guilt by association and dismiss the arguments of anyone who has a shared connection with a particular denomination or church. And in doing so, they avoid the need to confront the theological issues directly. This occurred quite often in the 4th and 5th centuries when the specifics of the doctrine of the Trinity were being hashed out. So, how can we avoid committing the ad hominem fallacy? This is our third and final point, and I also think that it's our most important point of this particular episode. And so let me look down at my list. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I have 8 tips to help you stop committing the ad hominem fallacy. We need to stop it. We need to stop doing this because it makes us look foolish and it keeps the debates from being fruitful. So, first tip. Number 1, stop using terms like heretic and Orthodox. These are subjective labels. To say that someone is a heretic and committing heresy, that's not a label that's based on truth or falsehood. It's just subjective. You're defining that something is heretical, but that person is going to define that what you're saying is heretical. It doesn't mean anything. We need to really be thinking in terms of what is true and what is false, as opposed to what is orthodox and what is heretical. Calling someone a heretic is just an arbitrary label. It's unloving, it's uncharitable, and in a debate, it's lazy. And the main issue is that it fails to move the conversation forward. So instead of saying that that particular belief has been condemned as heretical by the church for hundreds of years, you should instead make good, sound, logical arguments on why you think it is invalid. Number 2, focus on the argument, not on the person. When you're debating a topic. You're not debating another person. You're not attacking them. You're debating their position. Always make sure that you are addressing the content and the reasoning of your opponent's argument, rather than on your opponent and his or her personal attributes. Before responding, you could ask yourself, am I discussing the argument or am I attacking the person? If you're doing the latter, you need to stop. So instead of saying that you're wrong because you're uneducated, you should say that, well, your argument doesn't hold up because it overlooks this particular key piece of evidence. Number 3, you have to avoid reacting emotionally. Ad hominem attacks usually are knee-jerk reactions that are emotional outbursts in order to attack another person. And in heated debates, emotions can lead to the making of personal attacks. Stay calm. Focus on the facts. Focus on using logic. Emotional responses will lead to ad hominem fallacies. So take a moment to reflect before responding if you are feeling provoked. If someone uses an ad hominem fallacy against you, don't respond in kind. Be the better person. Number 4, you need to be able to separate character from claims. You might feel that the person you're debating has some questionable character, but you need to understand that that person's character, their behavior, their background, or their previous mistakes in their life, they don't necessarily invalidate their argument. Even if someone has a questionable background, that person can make a valid point. That person can say that 2 + 2 is 4. So even if someone has a vested interest in a topic, their argument needs to be evaluated on its merits rather than dismissing it outright. Number 5, we all need to practice being better active listeners. We need to be able to listen to our dialogue partners carefully, specifically to the arguments that they're making, without any preconceived notions or personal biases that we might have. Focus on their reasoning in a manner that's going to help you avoid making assumptions about their intent or their character. And of course, it's very difficult to prove intent because we can't read people's minds. So we should pretty much stop assuming the intent of others. Number 6, we need to try to use neutral language. Neutral language. Avoid judgmental language or inflammatory language when you are engaging in debates. Using neutral, fact-based language keeps the focus on the issue rather than attacking the individual. So instead of saying that, well, only an idiot would interpret a text like that, you should say that view overlooks this particular key piece of evidence. And then you point out the evidence. Number 7, we should be charitable enough to acknowledge when someone makes good points. We should recognize and acknowledge when our opponent is going to make a valid point. This not only reduces the temptation to dismiss their arguments with personal attacks, but it also is going to encourage constructive debate, and it makes you more likable to the audience. So you could say, well, I see your point on this issue, but here is where I disagree. So acknowledge when they make good points, even if you disagree with them. And lastly, number 8, be sure to clarify your intentions. If you feel that an argument may be misinterpreted as a personal attack, clarify your intentions. You should indicate that you're engaging with the argument itself and not with the person. So you can come out and say, for example, I'm not questioning your expertise. I just think this particular claim that you're making needs more evidence in order to be persuasive. And if you follow those 8 tips, you too can root out the use of ad hominem fallacies in your own life. Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode. Join us next week as we examine yet another common logical fallacy, namely the appeal to emotion fallacy. Please look forward to our next episode. If you enjoy our podcast, please consider supporting us as we aim to promote the sound truths about the oneness and unity of God and about the humanity of Jesus. If you feel led to donate, please check out our episode description for a PayPal link. Be sure to subscribe on YouTube or iTunes. If you feel that the podcast is doing well, you can give us an honest review on iTunes. And of course, I greatly appreciate it when you share your favorite episodes with your friends on social media. The Biblical Unitarian Podcast is produced and edited by Dustin Williams. I am Dustin Smith, your host. Until next time, please take care.